There was a boy in 7th grade who most people didn't notice. His name was Kai, and he had this way of walking through the hallways like he was trying not to take up too much space. He kept his head down. He kept his voice low. And if you asked most students at Lincoln Middle School if they knew who he was, they would probably shrug and say they had never heard of him. That was just how Kai liked it. Or at least, that was what he told himself. He sat in the back row of every class. Not because he was a troublemaker or because he didn't care about school. He actually cared a lot. He just didn't want anyone looking at him. When teachers asked questions, he would stare at his desk and pray they wouldn't call his name. When group projects came around, he would wait until everyone else had picked their partners, and then he would work alone. Teachers usually let him. They figured he was just shy, but shy wasn't really the right word. Kai wasn't afraid of people. He just didn't know how to be around them anymore. He had moved so many times in the past few years that making friends felt pointless. Why get close to someone when you're just going to leave again? His mom worked 2 jobs. One at a hotel downtown where she cleaned rooms from 6 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon. Then she would rush across town to a laundromat where she folded clothes and worked the register until 9 at night. Kai barely saw her during the week. By the time she got home, she was so tired that she could barely keep her eyes open long enough to ask him about his day. He didn't blame her. He knew she was doing everything she could. After his dad left 3 years ago, she had to figure out how to survive on her own with a kid to raise. There was no child support, no help from family. Just her, working herself to the bone so they could keep a roof over their heads. They lived in a small apartment on the east side of town. It wasn't a bad place, but it wasn't great either. The walls were thin, and Kai could hear the neighbors arguing most nights. The carpet smelled a little musty, and the hot water only worked half the time. But it was home. At least for now, Kai had learned not to get attached to places. They had moved 4 times in 2 years. Each time, his mom would promise that this one would be different, that this time they would stay. And each time, something would happen. Rent would go up. A landlord would sell the building. A job would fall through. And they would pack up their things and start over somewhere new. The only thing Kai had that stayed the same was a small electric keyboard that sat in the corner of his bedroom. It was old and a little beaten up. Some of the keys stuck if you pressed them too hard. But it had belonged to his grandmother, and it was the only thing he had left of her. She had passed away when Kai was 9. He still remembered sitting next to her on the piano bench in her living room, watching her fingers move across the keys like magic. She would play old songs from when she was young, and she would hum along in her soft, shaky voice. Sometimes she would take his small hands and place them on the keys, guiding him through simple melodies. "You have good hands," she used to tell him. "Piano hands. Someday you're going to make beautiful music." He didn't believe her back then. He was just a kid who liked spending time with his grandma. But after she was gone, he found himself sitting at her keyboard, trying to remember the things she taught him. At first, it was just a way to feel close to her again. But over time, it became something more. Kai taught himself to play using videos he found online. He would watch tutorials late at night, pausing and rewinding until he got each part right. He started with simple songs, nursery rhymes, and beginner pieces. But he learned fast. Within a year, he was playing songs that most kids his age wouldn't even attempt. Classical pieces. Jazz standards. He would find sheet music online, printed out at the school library, and practice until his fingers ached out, but he never told anyone. Not his mom. Not his teachers. Definitely not the kids at school. Music was his secret. It was the one thing that belonged only to him, the one place where he didn't feel invisible or awkward or out of place. When he played, He wasn't the quiet kid who sat alone at lunch. He was someone else entirely. Someone confident. Someone free. Every night, after he finished his homework and his mom was still at work, Kai would sit at his keyboard with his headphones on and lose himself in the music. The apartment would be dark and quiet, but in his head, he was somewhere else entirely. He imagined himself on a big stage in front of hundreds of people, playing a grand piano that gleamed under bright lights. He imagined his grandmother watching from somewhere, smiling and nodding along. Those were the only moments when Kai felt like himself. The rest of the time, he was just trying to get through the day without being noticed. School was the hardest part. Not because the work was difficult. Kai was actually a good student. He turned in his assignments on time and studied for tests. But the social stuff was exhausting. Watching other kids laugh and joke with their friends. Seeing groups form and reform, and always being on the outside looking in. It wasn't that anyone was mean to him. Most people were just indifferent. It was background noise. Part of the scenery. Lunch was the worst. Kai would grab his tray from the cafeteria line and find a spot in the far corner, near the windows where nobody sat. He would eat quickly, keeping his eyes on his food, and then he would escape to the library until the bell rang. The librarian knew him by now. She never asked why he spent every lunch period hiding between the shelves. She just let him be. Sometimes Kai wondered what it would be like to have friends. Real friends, the kind who saved you a seat and asked about your weekend and actually cared about the answer. He used to have friends like that, back before all the moving started. He remembered birthday parties and sleepovers and inside jokes that made him laugh until his stomach hurt. But that felt like a different life now. A life that belonged to a different version of himself. Now he just kept his head down and counted the days until summer. He figured middle school was something to survive, not enjoy. High school would be the same. And then maybe, someday, he would find a place where he actually fit in. A place where people saw him for who he really was. But until then, he had his keyboard. He had his music. And that was enough. Or at least, that was what he kept telling himself. What Kai didn't know was that everything was about to change. That a single moment on an ordinary afternoon would crack open the quiet little world he had built for himself. And once it did, nothing would ever be the same again. But that part of the story comes later. For now, he was just a boy with a secret, sitting in the back of the classroom, waiting for the bell to ring so he could go home and play dot. It happened on a Thursday afternoon in late October. The kind of day where the sky was gray and the air smelled like rain, and everything felt a little heavier than usual. Kai had finished his lunch early. The cafeteria was loud that day, louder than normal, because some kids at the popular table were laughing about something on someone's phone. He didn't know what it was, and he didn't care. He just wanted to get out of there. Usually, he would go straight to the library. That was his routine. Eat fast, escape to the shelves, wait for the bell. But that day, something made him turn left instead of right when he reached the main hallway. Maybe it was boredom. Maybe it was curiosity. Or maybe it was something else entirely, something he couldn't explain. He found himself walking toward the auditorium. The auditorium was on the far side of the school, past the gym and the science labs. Most students only went there for assemblies or school plays. It was usually locked during lunch, but sometimes the janitor forgot to close the side door. Kai had discovered this a few weeks earlier when he was wandering the halls, trying to kill time. That day, the side door was open again. Just a crack. Just enough. Kai looked around to make sure no one was watching. Then he slipped inside. The auditorium was dark and quiet. The only light came from a few small windows near the ceiling, casting long shadows across the rows of empty seats. It smelled like dust and old curtains. Kai stood there for a moment, letting his eyes adjust to the dimness. And then he saw it. The piano. It sat on the stage, off to one side, covered in a thin layer of dust. It was a real piano. A grand piano. The kind Kai had only ever seen in videos and movies. It was beautiful, even in the low light. The wood was dark and polished, and the keys seemed to glow faintly, like they were waiting for someone to come and wake them up. Kai's heart started, beating faster. He had never played a real piano before. His grandmother's keyboard was electric. It sounded okay, but it wasn't the same. He had read about the difference online. How a real piano had weight to the keys. How the sound came from actual strings vibrating inside the body. How it felt different under your fingers, more alive somehow. He told himself to leave. This was stupid. Someone could walk in at any moment. He could get in trouble. He wasn't supposed to be here, but his feet were already moving. Before he knew it, he was climbing the steps to the stage. Before he could stop himself, he was standing in front of the piano, running his fingers along the smooth wooden edge. And before he could talk himself out of it, he was sitting down on the bench. The keys were cool under his fingertips. He pressed one, softly, and the note rang out through the empty auditorium. It was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. Rich and full and real in a way his keyboard at home could never be. Kai closed his eyes. He thought about his grandmother. He thought about all those nights alone in his room, practicing until his fingers hurt. He thought about the videos he watched over and over, trying to get every note perfect. He thought about how music was the only thing that made him feel like himself. And then he started to play. He chose a piece he had been working on for months. A classical piece, something by Chopin. It was difficult, full of complicated runs and delicate passages that required perfect control. He had practiced it so many times that his fingers knew it by heart. But playing it on this piano, in this empty auditorium, felt completely different. The sound filled the room. It bounced off the walls and the ceiling and the empty seats. It wrapped around him like a blanket. For a few minutes, Kai forgot where he was. He forgot about school and loneliness and all the things that made his life feel small and hard. There was only the music, only the feeling of the keys under his fingers and the notes pouring out. Of him like water. He played the whole piece from beginning to end. When he finished, he sat there with his hands still on the keys, breathing hard. His heart was pounding, but not from fear, from something else. Something that felt like joy. And then he heard it. A single clap. Then another. Then another. Kai's eyes flew open. He spun around on the bench, his stomach dropping like a stone. Someone was standing at the back of the auditorium. A woman. She was walking down the center aisle, still clapping slowly, her footsteps echoing in the silence. Kai wanted to run. Every instinct told him to bolt off the stage and out the side door and never look back. But his legs wouldn't move. He was frozen like a deer caught in headlights. The woman reached the front of the auditorium and stopped. She was middle-aged with short gray hair and glasses that sat low on her nose. She was wearing a cardigan with musical notes printed on it, and she was smiling. Kai recognized her. It was Mrs. Lin, the school's music teacher. He had seen her in the hallways before, always carrying stacks of sheet music or humming to herself. He had never spoken to her. He had never even made eye contact with her. Now she was staring right at him. "I came in to grab some equipment from the back," she said, her voice calm and warm. "I heard someone playing and thought maybe one of my students had snuck in to practice. But I don't recognize you from any of my classes." Kai opened his mouth to say something, but no words came out. He just sat there, gripping the edge of the piano bench, like it was the only thing keeping him from floating away. Mrs. Lin tilted her head to one side, studying him. "That was Chopin," she said. Nocturne in E-flat major, one of his most famous pieces. Also one of his most difficult. Kai nodded, still unable to speak. You played it beautifully, she continued. I mean that. I've been teaching music for over 20 years, and I've heard a lot of students play that piece. Most of them struggle with the phrasing, the emotion. They hit the notes, but they miss the feeling. She paused. You didn't miss anything. Kai felt his face getting hot. He wasn't used to compliments. He didn't know what to do with them. Mrs. Lin walked closer, stopping at the edge of the stage. She looked up at him with curious eyes. What's your name? Kai, he managed to say. His voice came out rough, like he hadn't used it in a while. Kai, she repeated, like she was filing it away somewhere important. I've never seen you in the music program. Do you take lessons somewhere? Private teacher? He shook his head. School band? Orchestra? Choir? Another shake. Mrs. Lin's eyebrows went up. Then how did you learn to play like that? Kai looked down at the piano keys. He thought about lying, making up some story about a teacher he used to have before he moved. But something about the way Mrs. Lin was looking at him made him want to tell the truth. I taught myself, he said quietly. Online, videos and stuff. I've been practicing for a few years. For a moment, Mrs. Lin didn't say anything. She just stood there, staring at him like he had just told her he could fly. You taught yourself, she said slowly. To play Chopin. From YouTube videos. Kai nodded. Mrs. Lin let out a breath that sounded like a laugh, but not a mean one. More like the kind of laugh you make when something surprises you in a good way. Kai, she said, shaking her head slowly. How long have you been hiding this gift? He didn't have an answer for that. He had never thought of it as hiding. He had just been surviving, one day at a time, keeping his head down and waiting for something to change. He didn't know it yet, but that something had just arrived. Standing right there in front of him, wearing a cardigan with musical notes on it. Looking at him like he was worth seeing. For the first time in a long time, Kai didn't feel invisible, and that terrified him more than anything. Kai didn't sleep well that night. He kept replaying the moment in the auditorium over and over in his head. The sound of the piano. The look on Mrs. Lin's face. The way she had called his playing a gift, like it was something special, something worth noticing. Part of him wanted to believe her. But another part, the louder part, kept telling him it was a mistake. He had let his guard down. He had been careless. And now someone knew his secret. He told himself it didn't matter. Mrs. Lin was just a teacher. She would probably forget about him by tomorrow. He was easy to forget. That was the whole point. But the next day at school, something happened that Kai didn't expect. He was sitting in the back of his third period class, staring out the window when a student aide came in with a note. The teacher read it, looked up, and called his name. Kai, you're wanted in the music room. Every head in the class turned to look at him. Kai felt his face go red. He grabbed his bag and walked out of the room as fast as he could, keeping his eyes on the floor. The music room was on the second floor, near the art studios. Kai had walked past it 100 times, but had never gone inside. When he reached the door, he hesitated. His hand hovered over the handle. He thought about turning around and going back to class, pretending he never got the note. But something made him push the door open. Mrs. Lin was sitting at a desk in the corner, surrounded by stacks of sheet music and old instrument cases. She looked up when he came in and smiled. Kai, thanks for coming. Close the door and have a seat. He did as she asked, pulling up a chair across from her desk. His heart was beating hard, and he had no idea what to say. Mrs. Lin leaned back in her chair and studied him for a moment. I've been thinking about you since yesterday, she said. I couldn't get that performance out of my head. I went home and told my husband about it. He thought I was exaggerating, Kai didn't know how to respond, so he just sat there, gripping the straps of his backpack. I did some digging, she continued. Talked to a few of your teachers. They say you're a good student, quiet, keep to yourself, never cause any trouble. She paused. They also said they don't really know much about you. You're like a ghost around here. Kai shrugged. I move a lot. It's hard to make friends when you know you're just going to leave. Mrs. Lin nodded slowly, like she understood more than he was saying. How long have you been at this school? Since August. So a couple months. And before that, a school across town. Before that, one in another city. We move wherever my mom can find work. Mrs. Lin's expression softened. That must be hard. Starting over all the time. Kai shrugged again. He didn't like talking about this stuff. It made him feel exposed, like he was standing in the middle of a room with no walls. But Mrs. Lin didn't push. She just nodded and moved on. Let me ask you something, she said. Have you ever had a piano lesson? A real one, with a teacher? Kai shook his head. We can't afford it. Lessons are expensive. What about school programs? You know, we have a music department here. We have a piano. I teach classes. I didn't know I could just join, Kai said quietly. And I didn't want anyone to know I played. Why not? He looked down at his hands. I don't know. It's just mine, you know? The one thing that's just for me. I didn't want to share it. Mrs. Lin was quiet for a moment. Then she leaned forward, resting her elbows on the desk. I get that, she said. I really do. Music can feel like the most private thing in the world. It's where we put all the stuff we can't say out loud. But here's the thing, Kai. What you have is rare. Really rare. I'm not just saying that to make you feel good. I've been teaching for over 20 years, and I can count on one hand the number of students I've met with your kind of natural ability. Kai felt something stir in his chest. He wasn't sure if it was hope or fear. Maybe both thought Mrs. Lin reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a flyer. She slid it across the desk toward him. There's a competition coming up, she said. A regional one for young pianists. It's in about 3 months. Students from all over the state enter. The winners get scholarships, invitations to summer programs, connections to music schools. It's a big deal. Kai looked at the flyer. There was a picture of a grand piano on the front, surrounded by pictures of smiling kids holding trophies. It looked like something from another world. A world where kids like him didn't belong. I can't do that, he said, shaking his head. I'm not that kind of person. What kind of person? The kind who gets up on stage. The kind who competes. I just play for myself. In my room. Alone. Mrs. Lin smiled gently. I know, and that's okay. But I want to make you an offer. She folded her hands on the desk and looked him straight in the eyes. I'll teach you, she said. For free. After school, a few times a week. We'll work on your technique, your repertoire, your performance skills. And in 3 months, you'll enter that competition. Kai stared at her. Why would you do that? Because I believe in you, she said simply. And because talent like yours shouldn't stay hidden in an empty auditorium. The world deserves to hear it. And more importantly, you deserve to be heard. Kai didn't know what to say. No one had ever talked to him like this before. No one had ever looked at him and seen something worth investing in. He thought about his mom, working 2 jobs just to keep them afloat. He thought about all the times he had told himself that dreams were for other people. People with money. People with connections. People who didn't have to worry about where they were going to live next month. And then he thought about his grandmother. The way she used to smile when he played. The way she always told him he was meant for something more. I don't know if I can do it, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Get up on a stage. In front of people. What if I mess up? What if everyone laughs? Mrs. Lin reached across the desk and put her hand on his. Then you mess up, she said. And you learn from it. And you try again. That's what music is. That's what life is. The only real failure is never trying at all. Kai looked at the flyer again. The smiling faces. The shiny trophies. It all seemed so far away. So impossible. But somewhere deep inside him, a tiny voice was saying something different. A voice that sounded a lot like his grandmother. You have good hands. Piano hands. Someday you're going to make beautiful music. He took a deep breath. Okay, he said. I'll try. Mrs. Lin's face broke into a wide smile. That's all I needed to hear. She stood up and walked over to the piano in the corner of the room. She lifted the lid and gestured for him to come over. Let's get started, she said. Kai stood up slowly. His legs felt shaky. His heart was pounding. But for the first time in as long as he could remember, he wasn't walking towards something with his head down, hoping not to be seen. He was walking towards something that mattered. Something that scared him. Something that felt like the beginning of a story he had been waiting his whole life to tell. He sat down at the piano. Mrs. Lin stood beside him, arms crossed, watching. Show me what you've got, she said, and Kai began to play. The weeks that followed were the strangest of Kai's life. Every day after school, he would go to the music room and practice with Mrs. Lin. She taught him things he never knew he was missing. How to control his breathing. How to use the weight of his arms instead of just his fingers. How to find the story inside a piece of music and tell it with every note. It was hard work. Harder than anything Kai had ever done. Some days his hands ached so much he could barely hold a pencil. Some days he wanted to quit, to go back to playing alone in his room where no one could judge him. But Mrs. Lin never let him give up. She pushed him, encouraged him, believed in him even when he didn't believe in himself. For a while, Kai managed to keep it all a secret. He would slip into the music room after the hallways cleared out and leave before anyone noticed. He didn't tell his mom about the competition. He didn't tell anyone. It still felt too fragile, too unreal. Like if he talked about it out loud, it might disappear. But secrets have a way of getting out. Especially in middle school. It started with the janitor. His name was Mr. Reeves, a quiet older man who had worked at the school for almost 30 years. He was usually emptying trash cans and mopping floors while Kai practiced. One evening, Kai noticed him standing in the doorway of the music room, leaning on his mop just listening. When Kai finished playing, Mr. Reeves gave him a small nod. That's real nice, he said. You got a gift, son. Kai mumbled a thank you and went back to practicing. He didn't think much of it, but Mr. Reeves told one of the teachers. That teacher told another. And slowly, word began to spread. A few days later, Kai noticed something strange. When he walked to the music room after school, there were a couple of students lingering in the hallway nearby. They weren't doing anything, just standing there, talking quietly. When Kai went inside and started playing, he could see them through the small window in the door, watching. The next day, there were more. Kai tried to ignore it. He told himself it didn't matter. But it was hard to focus when he knew people were listening. His fingers stumbled. His timing got shaky. Mrs. Lin noticed. You're tensing up, she said during one of their sessions. What's going on? Kai glanced toward the door. 3 faces were pressed against the window, trying to see inside. Mrs. Lin followed his gaze and sighed. Ah, you've got an audience. I don't like it, Kai admitted. It makes me nervous. Mrs. Lin walked over to the door and opened it. The students outside jumped back, startled. If you want to listen, come inside and sit down, she said firmly. But no talking, and no phones. The students looked at each other, surprised. Then, slowly, they filed into the room and took seats in the back corner. Kai's heart was pounding. He wanted to run, but Mrs. Lin just smiled at him and nodded toward the piano. "Play," she said. "Pretend they're not here." It was the hardest thing Kai had ever done. His hands were shaking as he started the piece. He messed up the first few bars and had to start over. But slowly, note by note, he found his rhythm. He closed his eyes and let the music take over. And by the time he finished, he had almost forgotten anyone else was in the room. When he opened his eyes, the students in the back were staring at him with wide eyes. One of them, a girl with curly hair and braces, started clapping. The others joined in. Kai didn't know what to do. He had never been applauded by kids his own age before. He just sat there, face burning, until Mrs. Lin rescued him by announcing that practice was over for the day. But that wasn't the end of it. That night, one of the students posted a video online. Kai didn't even know someone had recorded him. But there it was on the school's social media page. A shaky phone video of him playing piano, filmed through the window of the music room door. The caption said, "Did you know we have a piano genius at our school?" By the next morning, everyone had seen it. Kai walked into school expecting the worst. He expected people to laugh at him, to make fun of the quiet kid who thought he was special, to tear him down the way middle schoolers always seem to tear down anyone who stood out. But that's not what happened. Instead, people smiled at him in the hallways. A kid from his math class gave him a thumbs up. A group of 8th graders he had never spoken to stopped him near the lockers and told him the video was awesome. It was confusing, overwhelming. Kai didn't know how to handle any of it. And then things got even more complicated. Mrs. Lin called him into her office one afternoon with a serious look on her face. "The competition is in 3 weeks, she said. "We need to talk about logistics." Kai nodded, not sure what she meant. "The competition is 2 hours away," she continued. "You'll need transportation. You'll need appropriate clothes to perform in. A suit, or at least a nice dress shirt and pants. Do you have those things?" Kai felt his stomach drop. He hadn't thought about any of that. He had been so focused on the music that he forgot about everything else. "I don't have a suit," he said quietly. "And my mom, she works all the time. I don't think she can take a day off to drive me." Mrs. Lin nodded slowly. "I figured as much. That's why I've been making some calls." She told him that she had talked to the principal. She had talked to the PTA. She had even talked to some of the other teachers. And together, they had come up with a plan. The school was going to help. Kai didn't understand at first. Help how? Why would anyone go out of their way for him? But over the next few days, he saw it with his own eyes. The PTA organized a small fundraiser. Students donated money from their allowances. One girl sold homemade bracelets at lunch and gave all the profits to the fund. A local tailor heard about the story and offered to alter a suit for Kai for free. A parent volunteered to drive him to the competition. Another parent offered to drive a whole group of students who wanted to come and cheer him on. Kai couldn't believe it. These were people he had never spoken to. People he had walked past every day without making eye contact. People he assumed didn't even know he existed, but they knew. They had always known. He just hadn't let himself see it. One afternoon, a boy from his English class approached him at lunch. Kai recognized him as one of the popular kids. The guy who always had a group of friends around him and never seemed to struggle with anything. "Hey," the boy said, sitting down across from Kai. "I heard you're doing that piano thing." "That's pretty cool." Kai shrugged, not sure what to say. "I used to play drums," the boy continued. "Quit a couple years ago because I thought it wasn't cool. Watching you made me think maybe I should start again." He gave Kai a small smile, then got up and walked away. Kai sat there for a long time after that, staring at his lunch tray. Something inside him was shifting, something he couldn't quite name. For so long, he had told himself that he was invisible, that no one cared, that he was better off alone. But maybe that wasn't true. Maybe he had just been so busy protecting himself that he never gave anyone a chance to get close. That night, he finally told his mom about the competition. She cried. Not sad tears, but happy ones. She hugged him so tight he could barely breathe and told him how proud she was. Your grandmother would be so happy, she whispered. She always knew you were special. Kai hugged her back and didn't say anything. He didn't need to. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was carrying everything alone. He had a teacher who believed in him, a school that was rooting for him, a mom who loved him more than anything. And in 3 weeks, he was going to walk onto a stage and show the world what he could do. The thought still terrified him. But now, it excited him too. He was ready. The morning of the competition, Kai woke up before his alarm. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, his heart already racing. Outside, the sky was just starting to turn pink with the first light of dawn. In a few hours, he would be on a stage in front of hundreds of strangers, doing the thing he had only ever done alone. He wasn't sure if he was excited or terrified. Maybe both. His mom had taken the day off work. It was the first time in months she hadn't gone to one of her jobs. She made him breakfast that morning, pancakes with extra syrup, and sat across from him at the small kitchen table watching him eat. You're going to be amazing, she said. I already know it. Kai tried to smile, but his stomach was doing flips. He could barely get the food down by 9 o'clock. They were standing outside the school, waiting for the bus. And that's when Kai saw something that made him stop in his tracks. There were people everywhere. Students, teachers, parents. At least 40 of them, maybe more, all gathered in the parking lot with signs and banners. Some of the signs said things like, Go Kai, and We Believe in You. One of them had a drawing of a piano with musical notes floating around it. Kai stood there, frozen, not knowing what to say. Mrs. Lin walked over to him with a huge smile on her face. Surprised? I didn't know this many people were coming, Kai stammered. Neither did I, at first, she admitted. But word got around. People wanted to be here. They wanted to support you. A girl from his history class ran up and handed him a small card. We all signed it, she said. For good luck. Kai opened the card. Inside were dozens of messages, written in different handwriting. Some were from kids he recognized. Others were from people he had never even spoken to. But they all said the same thing in different words. We're proud of you. You've got this. We're rooting for you. Kai's eyes stung. He blinked hard and shoved the card into his pocket. Before anyone could see, the bus ride to the competition was loud and chaotic. Kids were talking and laughing and playing music on their phones. A few of them tried to get Kai to join in, but he was too nervous. He sat near the front with his mom on one side and Mrs. Lin on the other, staring out the window as the city passed by. You okay? His mom asked quietly. Kai nodded, even though he wasn't sure it was true. The competition was held in a big concert hall downtown. It was the fanciest building Kai had ever been inside. The floors were made of polished marble. The ceilings were high and covered with paintings. There were chandeliers hanging everywhere, glittering like something out of a movie. Kai felt completely out of place. He looked around at the other competitors, kids in expensive suits and dresses, carrying folders of sheet music and talking confidently with their parents and private coaches. They looked like they belonged here, like they had been preparing for this their whole lives. And then there was Kai, a kid in a borrowed suit, with no formal training, who had learned to play from YouTube videos in a tiny apartment on the east side of town. What was he doing here? Mrs. Lin seemed to read his mind. She put a hand on his shoulder and leaned in close. Don't compare yourself to them, she said. You're not here to be like anyone else. You're here to be you. That's enough. That's more than enough. Kai took a deep breath and nodded. The next few hours were a blur. He watched other competitors perform from backstage, listening through the speakers as they played pieces that were fast and complicated and technically perfect. Some of them were incredible. Some of them made Kai feel like he had no business being there at all. And then, finally, it was his turn. When they called his name, Kai felt like his legs had turned to stone. He couldn't move. He couldn't breathe. The backstage area suddenly felt too small, too hot, too crowded. But then he heard something. A sound coming from the audience. Faint at first, then louder. Clapping, cheering, his name being shouted by dozens of voices. He looked toward the curtain and saw Mrs. Lin standing there, smiling at him. They came all this way for you, she said. Now go show them why. Kai walked out onto the stage. The lights were bright, so bright he could barely see the audience. But he could hear them. He could feel them. All those people who had traveled 2 hours just to watch him play. His mom, his teachers, kids who used to walk past him like he wasn't even there. They were all here. For him, he sat down at the piano. It was a beautiful instrument, even bigger and more polished than the one at school. The keys were smooth and cool under his fingertips. He placed his hands in position and closed his eyes. For a moment, everything was silent. The whole world seemed to hold its breath. And then Kai began to play. He had chosen a piece that meant everything to him. It was the same song his grandmother used to play when he was little. The one she would hum while she cooked dinner. The one she had tried to teach him on that old keyboard in her living room. Back when he was too small to reach all the keys. He played it now. Not for the judges, not for the audience, not for the scholarship or the trophy or any of that. He played it for her. The music poured out of him like a river. Every note carried a memory. Every phrase told a story. He thought about his grandmother's hands guiding his. He thought about all those nights alone in his room, practicing until his fingers ached. He thought about Mrs. Lin believing in him when no one else did. He thought about a school full of strangers who became something more. When he finished, the last note hung in the air like a breath held too long. And then, silence. For one terrible second, Kai thought he had messed up. He thought the audience was sitting there in disappointment, waiting for something better. But then the applause started. It began slowly. Just a few claps. Then more. Then more. And suddenly the whole concert hall was on its feet, clapping and cheering and shouting his name. Kai stood up from the piano, his legs shaking, his heart pounding. He looked out into the audience and saw his mom in the front row, tears streaming down her face. He saw Mrs. Lin standing beside her, clapping so hard her hands must have hurt. He saw the kids from his school, jumping up and down, holding their signs in the air. He had done it. He had actually done it. When the results were announced later that evening, Kai placed second overall. The winner was a girl who had been taking lessons since she was 4 and had already performed in concert halls across the country. Kai didn't mind. Second place came with a full scholarship to a summer music program, an invitation to perform at a regional showcase, and the attention of several music school recruiters. But none of that mattered as much as the moment that came after as the crowd filed out and the other competitors packed up their things. Kai stood alone on the stage for a moment, looking out at the empty seats. His mom came up beside him and took his hand. "I wish your grandmother could have seen this," she whispered. Kai smiled. "I think she did." They stood there together, mother and son, in the quiet of the empty hall. And for the first time in a very long time, Kai didn't feel invisible. He didn't feel like a ghost passing through a world that didn't notice him. He felt seen. He felt known. He felt like he finally belonged somewhere, not because he had won a competition or impressed a bunch of judges, but because he had stopped hiding, because he had let people in, because he had been brave enough to share the one thing that mattered most to him, and in the end, that was the only victory that really counted. The quiet kid had played piano, and the world had listened.